I don't usually start my videos with a spoiler warning, but I am for this film. If you haven't seen this movie, go ahead, click away, go watch it, then come back. This is not a movie where you go in knowing a lot about it, okay? The less you know going into this, the more enjoyable your experience will be. So before you watch any farther, please go watch the movie if you haven't already, and then come back. Now, for those of you who have watched it, welcome. Let's get into this thing. Glass Onion was a film I totally forgot was coming out this year. It's the sequel to Knives Out, probably one of my favorite movies of 2019, which was a surprise to me because 2019 was filled with good movies. I mean, Endgame came out that year. That's still my favorite movie of that year, but I know, basic. But this one's up there. In Knives Out, I thought the cast, the performances, and the story and set were just incredible. I thought the whole film was fantastic, and I loved it. So when I heard that they were making a sequel, I was pretty excited, somewhat skeptical because, often sequels aren't as good as the first one. But I was like, maybe. I don't know, Ryan screwed up the last sequel he made. I know he didn't direct the first movie, but he still screwed up the sequel. Yes, I am still salty about The Last Jedi, Ryan. Anyway, we're not talking about Last Jedi here. We're not. I was excited for the sequel until I heard it was going to be a Netflix project, and then my expectations dropped. But after watching trailers and stuff like that, I got a little bit more excited. Needless to say, despite my low expectations and despite the fact that it was released on Netflix, Rian Johnson has left me stunned yet again with another amazing murder mystery film. And again, if you have not watched this film and for some reason you ignored the first warning, you were like, this guy's not serious, please click away, please. We need to go over the plot really quick, otherwise certain critiques won't work. This film follows Detective Blanc once again, who is played by Daniel Craig, after he gets a mysterious invite to go to a murder mystery party at billionaire Miles Braun's private island in Greece, the Glass Onion. Miles invites all his closest friends to this party, and even his former friend and once business partner, Andy Brand. Now, what's interesting about this is Andy lost her share of the company in a court case with Miles Braun. So the fact that he would invite her is kind of weird. As the film develops and as we get to learn a little bit more about each character, we see that they each have a pretty good reason to kill Miles Braun. Miles then pulls Blanc aside and reveals that he didn't actually invite Blanc to this party, but it's like, oh, it'd be fun to have a detective at my party. You can stay. Which I thought was dumb. You'll see later, but whatever. At dinner, when Miles begins the murder mystery, Blanc figures it out immediately at the table, which this murder mystery party was supposed to take like 3 days. So obviously Braun gets pretty pissed at Blanc, but Blanc then reveals he ruined the party on purpose because of how likely it is that someone on the island will kill Miles. Miles is like, no, not these guys, and then proceeds to party with all his friends and get drunk and all this stuff. It seems like a pretty miserable time until all of a sudden Duke, who is Dave Bautista's character, all of a sudden starts choking and dies of what seems to be poison. Everyone starts to freak out, as you would if this were to happen to you. And then they notice that Duke's gun that he's always carrying is missing. Miles then also informs Blanc that he set the lights to go off all about the island at around this time for the murder mystery thing that they were doing. So then the lights go off and everyone like children just starts running around like crazy, which isn't the smartest move in this scenario. And then we end up with Blanc and Andy running into one another in the front yard, right before you get into the mansion. And then they start talking to one another. And then Andy is shot by the murderer. And then fade to black. Then we enter a flashback sequence. But we go back to when Blanc first received his invite. And it's revealed that Andy's sister, Helen, actually gave him the invite. Because Andy was invited to this party. But Andy's dead. Bum, bum, bum. 2 days before this, Helen found Andy dead by apparent suicide. But Helen believes that she was actually murdered because Andy found something that was going to help her get her shares back or help prove her innocent or whatever. And she hid it in a red envelope. But when Helen went to go search Andy's house, she did not find the red envelope. She's like, you know what, Blanc? You're the best detective. You should go over to this party and figure out who it is. And Blanc's like, that's pretty suspicious. You know what you should do? You should go undercover as Andy, since y'all are twins, and we should find it out together. And Andy's like, no. And then Blanc's like, yeah. And then Andy's like, okay. So then we find out that the Andy that we've been seeing all throughout is actually Helen, and that her and Blanc have been teaming up to try to figure out who killed Andy. Pretty much until the big finale, we see Blanc and Andy's perspective of past events, how they were snooping around, what interactions they had with characters, what they were figuring out. We find out a lot more about these characters, about their motivations and how dependent they are on Miles, and their reasons to hate him. Then we get back to right before we faded to black before, and we see that Helen didn't actually die when she got shot, but that the killer shot her where she kept Andy's diary, and the diary was thick enough, strong enough, I don't know how to describe it, that it caught the bullet, so she lived. Blanc's like, you should play dead and go up to the glass onion and see if the red envelope's up there. So she plays dead and then sneaks up to the glass onion, and Blanc and the rest of the group reunite in the living room. And it's revealed that Miles is the killer. And then Miles, out of desperation, grabs the envelope and burns it, therefore destroying all evidence against him and against his claim to the company or whatever. I don't really know how to explain it. Then Blanc's like, I can't do anything else. I uncovered the truth, but I can't do anything besides that. But then he gives Helen something and then just proceeds to leave. We then get like the super long scene of Helen just going around the living room, like smashing objects, and some of the people in the house like joining her. But then it's over, and then you're like, what was that leading up to? And then all of a sudden, she starts a fire in the house, which causes the fuel that Miles was using to power the whole house, the fuel that he like risked his whole company for. It like catches fire and just blows the place up. Miles's house burns down and his whole legacy is like ruined. And that's pretty much how the movie ends. This movie surprised me in many different ways. For one, this is actually a pretty good sequel, which we don't see that often. So, great job, Ryan. You got one sequel correct. Second, I was surprised with how much I enjoyed certain twists in this film. I hate to go back to another Last Jedi reference, but Rian Johnson really does love to subvert expectations. And I was kind of nervous going into this film with what he would do, with how he would do that in this film. But maybe it was the fact that I didn't have that many expectations to subvert, but I enjoyed most of the twists. I wasn't a huge fan, though, of Helen's not actually dead twist. I really enjoyed how much of the film you're spent, like, overthinking who the murderer is, especially in the beginning. I really like that because it truly is obvious. I thought Miles off the bat was, like, the killer guy. But then you start hearing all these things and you're like, it can't be him. It's probably anyone but him. And then towards the end, you, like, slowly come back around to that. But I thought that was well done. And I thought the performances across the board were spectacular. The cast, yet again, for one of these Knives Out films were incredible. I thought it was hilarious how they brought in Ethan Hawke for like a 2-minute scene and that was it. As good as the story was, though, I wasn't a huge fan of like the message or what they were alluding to. The whole billionaire bad and all the people associated with billionaire are also bad was kind of like, what? I wasn't a whole fan of that. And it wasn't subtle at all. Maybe if it was subtle, but it's not here. And you can look on Twitter and see that pretty much everyone picked up on it. I also didn't like that the story was set in 2020. I understand that it was kind of used to explain a couple characters' motivations, like Birdie's whole thing with her being cooped up. And it also led to some funny yet unexpected moments, like Blanc playing Among Us. Like, if I would have read this script before I watched the movie, Blanc playing Among Us would be the one thing I was like, that's definitely not true. That all being said, I wasn't a huge fan of the 2020 time period. Lastly, there were a couple scenes that didn't look too great with the special effects. I don't know how much they use CGI for this film, or even if they did use CGI, but often it was very obvious that in certain locations and at certain times, there were actors in front of a green screen or something along that sort. There were a couple moments and a couple effects where I was like, that wasn't done as well as it probably could have been. But again, it doesn't ruin the film. It doesn't do anything like that. This movie is also sometimes slow. I personally didn't think it spent long enough with a couple characters. Like Whiskey and Birdie's assistant, I think her name's Peg or something like that. I never thought for a second that they were the murderer or they were the killer. And you can maybe make an argument for Whiskey, but never for a second did I think that it was Whiskey or that it was Peg. I also thought Lionel and Claire, which are Catherine Hahn and Leslie Odom Jr.'s characters, I felt like they didn't get enough fleshing out. Like, I understood their motivations, I understood what they did and kind of their characters, but I don't think they were utilized enough here. That all being said, I think Glass Onion is another great murder mystery in the Knives Out franchise. I think the performances were spectacular and the story's pretty good. Some messages and special effects are off, and I'm not a huge fan of the time period it's in. But I was pleasantly surprised with the film and look forward to seeing what's next for Mr. Blanc. What's his next mystery? But with all that said, that's about it for me. Let me know what y'all thought about Glass Onion down in the comment section below. Who did you think the killer was throughout? Not gonna lie, until his death, I thought it was Duke. And then after that, I was really confused. But let me know who you thought down in the comment section below. Let me know what y'all thought. As always, I love you guys. Thank you all so much for the love and support in 2022. And this is the last video of the year. So, yeah, I'll see you all in 2023. But until then, peace out, bro skillets.